Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
And welcome back to America's Heroes Group, our roundtable. We are globally connected. Military Families Matters with partner family caregiver Keisha L. Jackson. Today is Saturday, February 4th, 2023. February is Black History and American Heart Month. Our host is Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have our partner on the line, Keisha L. Jackson. She's a U.S. Air Force veteran and family caregiver. And she brought us again a wonderful panelist, and that is Dr. Robert W. Turner II, a former professional football player and also currently an assistant professor at the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Science. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, Sean. I'm doing well.
Doctor?
Doing well.
I'm feeling blessed. Very good. My dad's having a great day today, and we all things blessed. So it's all good.
Glad you guys have you here. Glad to have you here. So we're going to continue the conversation, the Black Male Caregiver of loved ones with dementia. We talked about this a little bit before. Go ahead.
Just before you all get into that conversation, and I definitely want to leave way for you all to really get into it since we didn't have a lot of time last time, but I did want to mention that the third Friday in February is every year is National Caregiver Day. And so I wanted to just recognize all of my fellow caregivers out there, professional, independent, private, informal, and fair family caregivers, and say thank you. Often you don't look to be thanked for what you do, but caregivers do a lot and are definitely appreciated.
Wow, that's really amazing. And also, that's one thing that's so important to give recognition, though, even though you may not be looking for anything in return, that does help to be appreciated.
Yeah. And then the other thing I'll mention, and then allow, for you and Dr. Turner to move in and into your conversation. I mentioned when I was caring for my mom and how I got into this topic of caregiving was I started going to conferences, and I noticed that there were a lot of people there, but there were not a lot of people of color, and there were not a lot of men, in particular our Black men there that were there. And so to have Dr. Turner again back on the show this week, since we had him just in December, I'm just so excited about the fact that you and Dr. Turner will be able to dialogue. So I'm going to step out and allow you all to go to it.
So, Doctor, what can you tell us about the role of a Black male, particularly being a caregiver? It's disappointing to hear that not many Black caregivers came up for the event, but tell us what you see and how what it means to you.
Well, first thing I want to do is just, and Keisha, I really appreciate you saying what you did, leading into the conversation, because even though Black men are not showing up at conferences and a lot of, African-American Black folks are not showing up at these places to get help, we in fact are. There's a lot of us, the data that I have, and it's really hard to kind of get my hands on the data, but everything that I've read suggests that anywhere between 35 and 45% of all caregivers in the Black community are men, right? And so what I always say, and I think I mentioned this the last time we talked, but we're hidden right in plain sight. And if you think about, lots of times where I think the big challenge for us as men is we don't necessarily think of ourselves as nurturing or caring for other people. But if you ask someone, are you taking care of your mother? Are you taking care of your loved one? They'll say, absolutely. That. And again, this kind of goes back to the same thing as we're not really seen as the men being home taking care of our parents. But we know many of us who live in these communities, that couldn't be anything farther from the truth. The other thing I want to mention is that, men within the community sometimes are not even looking after their own, biological or their married loved one. They're looking after someone right down the street, not going in, looking after them, seeing if you need medication, see if you need this, you need that. We're playing lots of different roles that we don't often think of ourselves as playing those roles, and we don't get the recognition or the credit that we are doing this. And so one of the reasons I'm here is to say that the biggest message, if I want anyone out there listening, when it comes to taking care of anyone, but particularly Black men, if you're in that role taking care of someone, you know how important it is to be around for that individual. And what I'm on a crusade is I really want you to take care of your own health, because you can't take care of anyone else unless you take care of yourself.
Now, when I took care of my mother, she had a stroke a couple of years back. And so I went home to help her out, and I was driving back and forth from Chicago to D.C., to Maryland, basically. But I never saw myself as a caregiver. I just saw myself as just helping mom out. But then you also have that stigma out there that, as black men, we get the reputation of not taking care of our kids, as always being absent and things like that. We're not looked at as the caregiver. If anything, we're the threat. Or irresponsible, or not the person that, it's usually the black female that's the one that holds the family together. In the mindset of pop culture and the mindset of what is how people kind of view us and what we hear all the time, even in media. So when you look at these numbers that you're mentioning, 35 to 45% of people, black men of the black community, men taking care of or being caregivers, that is something that goes way against the mindset of what we think and the stereotype. So how do you challenge the stereotype, and what needs to be done to kind of show the truth of what's really going on?
Well, I think there's a couple things, but you're absolutely right. One, we may use different language in our community. Just like, you're a great example of this. I use the word caregiver because I'm a researcher. I've been trained. I spend a lot of time around professionals. I'm very deeply ensconced with the Alzheimer's Association. This is nomenclature that they use, caregivers, right? Well, we may not use that, but, ultimately, we do talk about going down and taking care of grandma, auntie, looking after. I'll stop in and look after you. Right. That's the wording that we often use. And like you said, it was nothing for you to get in the car and drive, and you didn't use the word, caregiver. So just because that's the word that everybody else is using, that doesn't mean that we're not having prominent roles in our community and within our families. And just to say this, I'll give you a couple. And I have a good friend who's doing kind of the very same thing. He's a professor as well. He's looking after, that's what we do, is we look after. I'm going to make sure that you're all right, take care of you, those kinds of things. So I think we have to, the first thing we have to do is give ourselves a little license, a little leeway, that we don't have to use the language of everybody else to define what we're doing. That's number one. But I think the other thing that will help us come out of the shadows is that we have to redefine, in some respects, what it means to be a man. You don't have to suffer in silence. You don't have to be the only one doing all this. You can step out and tell your friends. Look, one of the things that I have found by taking care of my dad is that when I talk to my male friends, I say, hey, listen, I've moved back to take care of my dad. So it means that some of my social life is not going to be the same way. But my friends, my closest friends, both inside of academia and science, but just my boys, they are saying to me, hey, we applaud you. We want to learn from you because we understand that this might be coming down the pipe for us. So I found a lot of strength in my community by telling my other brothers that this is what I'm going through. And they've been there very supportive for me. And it gives you other people within that, who going through the same thing to say, well, I can step up and say that that's what I'm doing too. I'm looking after my mother. I'm looking after my father. I'm looking after my brother, my aunt. That's what I'm doing too. So coming out of the shadows and talking about it is going to help us a lot.
What I notice in my community a lot is with the younger generation, or I don't say the younger generation, but the parents that are raising children today, young children. I'm in that group as well. But there is sometimes some families have a network where they're communicating with other families and sharing some of the responsibilities, which I think is smart, and I think it's good for the kids. It's good for the families, because maybe if one couple wants to go out and have a date night, then another family can babysit. Or if somebody is going to the park or going someplace, they can say, hey, why don't you all bring the whole gang along, and so everybody goes, file piles into the family van, and then goes on a trip, and maybe mom and dad or somebody can have a break to do something else. Is that mindset common among people who are taking care of not kids but parents or adults, or a loved one who is an adult that needs care?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is recognize that in our country, when it comes to older adults, I think one of the things that has hurt us in the Black community, we used to live in the same neighborhoods. We used to live in the communities. My dad has 9 siblings. My grandmother had 9 siblings, and my grandfather had 9 siblings. When they all moved up from North Carolina to New Jersey, the whole enclave lived by each other. right? So back in the day when my great aunt started, we used to say, well, she's a little senile or she's a little forgetful or whatever. Unfortunately, a lot of times, a lot of families, they put them up on the third floor and kind of just forget about them up there. But the one thing we did have is we had a community all around us, right? So you helped each other in so many different ways. Now that we've moved, my siblings one lives in Portland, Oregon, one lives in Rhode Island, another one lives down in Virginia, another one lives up in upstate New York. It's very hard to have that, that family to draw on all the time. So I would just encourage people to find a social network, whether it's your boys that you went to college with, the high school friends you went with, people from your church, your fraternity. You cannot be a caregiver effectively by yourself. You're going to need that social support. Just like when you're raising kids, right? Sometimes somebody got to be there to pick up the kids from after school or take them to help you, to take them to sports. You're going to need that same kind of support when you're looking after a loved one. And in my case, my dad has dementia.
I think that's words of wisdom, particularly. Like you said, just like you take our kids will go and get a ride from the neighbor to school one day, and then some days we'll take the kids to school. But we got to get that mentality at the community level with our adults. I think it seems like we still are not bringing to the forefront the idea of we have an aging population in this country. And at some point, we're going to all have to chip in and do a better job of taking care of our elders.
No question. On that point, which these numbers are staggering. I don't want to overwhelm people with numbers, but I think right now, the one group, here's something I just want us to think about. The group that has the highest risk or the highest incidence of Alzheimer's disease are Black women. Women in total have they have a higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease than men. But Black women, so it hits our community the hardest of any other community, more than Hispanics, more than Asians, more than whites. Black women they're more susceptible. They're at the higher incidence. But at the same time, where then means that, Black men there's more of us that have to step up. So it's hitting our community harder. And we have fewer resources to draw from. As an example, I think I mentioned to you before that annually the Alzheimer's Association suggests that about $256 billion of unpaid caregiving resources are spent in households by family members and loved ones providing care. And an overwhelming percentage of that is coming from the Black community. And we're expecting what we call a silver tsunami coming forward, where I think by 2030, we'll have more people over the age of 65 than in any other point in history. So if you think about what does that mean to our communities, what does that mean for Black men when we have to take care of more women in our community? That means that we really have to find internal resources to support one another than waiting for the government, than waiting for anyone else. We're going to have to collectively, inside of our communities, figure out how to support one another as we support this growing neurodegenerative disease in our community.
Tell like Paul Revere now, because that's really important to get that message out. We have an aging population. At some point, that silver tsunami is going to hit us, and that's going to put strains on Social Security. It's going to put strains on a lot of government agencies and resources. Do you see the government doing enough to really take this seriously, and do they have the tools and the understanding of the problem to address it?
Well, I think this. I think there's an incredible amount of money pouring into research. When I first started this, I think. About 7, 8 years ago, the National Institute of Aging, their budget for Alzheimer's research, dementia research, was about $450 million. And in that 7-year period, it has increased. It is now over $3 billion, almost $3.5 billion. There's a great deal of money going into that. Where we see much less money and really trying to figure out what's the best way to spend that money is in caregiving. Because if you think about it again, right, Social Security is not going to do it. We have a housing problem right now. People have to go to work. I really feel for, and I'm very concerned about the sandwich generation. I have a good friend who played in the NFL. He played for the Detroit Lions. He's got young kids at home. They're, one's just starting high school, where his last one's just starting high school. But both his mom and dad have some real physical issues, and they're starting to move into the mental issues. Where are the resources that are necessary to help them is really, really difficult. And in his instance, his sister lives in Detroit, continues to live down the street from the parents. He lives in North Carolina. So it's really challenging for him to go back and forth between North Carolina and up to Detroit and help his sister provide the care for the parents. His first question to me is, Rob, where do I turn to find the resources that I need? Right. So it's a question about, is there resources available? How much of those resources can you get access? But the big question is, where do you find them? Is there a caregiver around? Is there what we would say is a case management worker around that can help me marshal all of the resources? So the big things are, one, is you get in that crisis period when it first happens, but then two is when you try to find a way where you can have some kind of routine in life and the resources that you need once you over that crisis period to that day-to-day interactions by looking after and taking care of your loved ones.
So someone gets the news. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sean, let me just interject. That's why I love having these conversations and bringing in the guest panelists to talk, to be able to help people to put things in place before. And I'll keep going back to one of my guests that was on before. She was on in January, Loretta. And when her mom was diagnosed with dementia, instead of signing up at that particular time when she first learned that her mother had dementia, she didn't sign up through the local area agency on aging. She felt that financially she was okay to take care of things and manage things. She waited 4 years later to sign up, and then she was like number 28,000 on the list. And it took her another 8 years to get to the top of the list. And so that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to have these topics, and even kind of throw around the word caregiver, because others are using it. And by using that, they're learning a little bit more about the resources. And then within our community, because we see it as what we do, what we were taught, how we were raised, and this is what we do, those finances or those programs out there, a lot of times we don't hear about them and we don't even think about them, but they're out there for us.
So where do you find those resources? What's the first, if a person finds out today that their mother has a stroke or had a stroke, and then they have to go move back home to take care of them, what's the first place they should call?
I always say, for me, the local area agency, because I would start with your local areas, because if there's, something on the national or federal level, it may be a little difficult to get to. But when you start with your local resources, that's always a good network. I partner with AARP, sorry, they just slipped my mind, with AARP, and they have so many different resources, a part of the veterans community, there's the Red Cross, but I would always still go back starting with your local resources, and not just that, your church, your neighbors, your friends, but sometimes you have to be able to come above yourself, because sometimes we don't want people to know that this is going on in our household, and it could be something that's out there or someone that can share information to help us.
And Keisha, one day we're going to talk about the veteran benefits for, I believe it's respite care. Respite care, or it might be at-home care or skilled care for at-home disabled veterans or people that need caregiving. Because I know there's two programs out there, and I did this for a veteran a few years ago who was in dire straits, didn't have anyone around him to take care of him. So I was trying to find people that could help him. So I just called VA, and then they gave me these two options, but nobody had any information about the options. Nobody knew anything that could tell me anything about, you're like, well, I think this guy over here does it, or this guy over there does it, or call this person over there, and then no, we don't do that over here. So I got the runaround. We got to go back and pick this topic up. We got about 30 seconds left. Keisha, last words?
No, I'll turn it over to Dr. Turner.
Dr. Turner?
Well, yeah, let me just say to that last question you had, especially if you find yourself in a hospital with a loved one, like a stroke or something like that, most often the hospital will have some kind of case management worker or a social worker or something. Start writing out, ask that person right there, where do I go for help? Who can help me? there's always definitely the county you start with, especially if you're looking at older adults. They can help you. And if you have a primary care physician, ask them where do I start? Because you can't. Oftentimes you feel paralyzed when you're in that crisis point. You need someone to help you carry the ball for a little while.
Keisha L. Jackson, U.S. Air Force veteran and family caregiver. Dr. Robert W. Turner II is a former professional football player and currently assistant professor in the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Science. Thank you for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Sean.
This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.